All right, party people, welcome back to the IBS Freedom Podcast. You guys are probably really deeply confused by the title of this episode. Amy has given me full reign to name it something clickbaity and weird to get you to listen to this one. So if you're here for politics, go ahead and leave. Sorry, I totally clickbaited you into watching this thing. But if you want to hear about gut health and how social interactions and connection with other people and connection with the world around you influences the vagus nerve and the gut, which is the actual topic for the day, stay tuned because that's what we're going to discuss.
Ooh,
Do you want to lead us off?
juicy.
Not to like put pressure on you.
Actually, I want to talk about socialism now.
Oh, okay.
Actual
Okay.
socialism.
We're going to go there, people. Let's talk about politics for the first and last time ever on this
You're
podcast.
right. Um, yeah, it's interesting thinking about social connection in the context of my own journey, just because I think there's a very clear relationship with when I was more antisocial and and getting worse, and then when I was more social and getting better. I mean, the biggest thing really was having more socialization just going back to school. I mean, when you go back to school, especially the second year, because you have the same classes with the same people and you start to become friends with people. So you hang out in between classes and you're there all day. So there's a lot more social connection versus working. When I worked, I interacted a little bit with coworkers and had some good coworker friends. But, other than that, I was kind of going home and not I lived with some people that were my age, which was nice, but I wasn't really out and about. I was way more isolated than typical. But I do think, social engagement really negatively affected my gut health when I cut it out, and I could see a more positive trend when I put it back in. Now, it wasn't crazy. Like the second I went to school and started interacting with people, my gut health
The
immediately
moment you walk
changed.
through the
Right.
door,
It wasn't anything like that, but, there's definitely going to be less focus on the gut when you're around other people, which I think is really great. It's almost, I don't even want to say it's a distraction because you're connected and you're zoned in on something that you care about or someone that you care about.
because
Um,
something is more important to you than the gut symptoms in that moment. Maybe that's a better way
right,
to put it.
right, exactly. Um, but yeah, it's clear in my own journey that that was a big problem when I wasn't social connecting. And then things did slowly improve once connection was more of a bigger piece of the strategies. And I don't even think it was really a strategy. It was just a natural thing that happened with going back to school. Um, and then I did definitely do more things with friends as things got better too, which I don't necessarily think is the best way to do it. I think you should still be engaging with your friends even when you're not doing well. I think sometimes, from my standpoint, I let my gut symptoms uh, dictate when and like how I was engaging with people socially. When in reality, I think you're much better off pushing through some discomfort, maybe, of, oh, I can't eat at this restaurant, but my friends are going to be meeting up there. Maybe I can like just chill with them and not eat, or maybe I can find something that I can eat. There's a
Well, or even like, and I don't know, maybe I've had really amazing friends and family all my life, and I'm hashtag blessed to say this, but I always wonder too, like, is there? I feel like there's not a lot of dialogue of people talking to their friends and family about their needs and asking for some degree of accommodation. Like, it's not to say that you mandate that every gathering has to be at this one restaurant completely across town and like be a pain in the ass. But yeah, I found in my experience when I bring this up with like friends or family or my in laws, and I say, like, hey guys, would you mind if I help select the restaurant? I need to be careful with gluten and make sure they have something I can eat. Whenever I've voiced that kind of issue and I'm just like down to earth and chill about it, all of the people I've ever asked are like, "Oh yeah, that's totally fine. You can absolutely pick the restaurant and we'll just be
Right.
flexible." So I find that that doesn't come up as much as I
Well,
feel like it could
there
too.
is definitely some nuance. I think there's definitely opportunities for people to advocate and kind of again get their friends involved in there may be some apprehension or anxiety around, changing plans to meet your needs or anything like that. So that's definitely something to work on if you struggle with that. I struggled with that. Like to me it would if someone was dead set on a restaurant and me being like, "Actually, can we go somewhere else?" Like I would hate doing that back then. I'd probably be better now. But I think what happens is in the IBS space a lot is that there's so many restrictions, which is a red flag. If like it's really hard
Harkening
to
back to the red flags
right,
episodes.
unless you're doing low FODMAP for a therapeutic period of time, but like if you've been on this road for a while with gut health symptoms and you just really struggle to go out to a restaurant to find anything to eat, it could be a red flag that maybe you need to broaden the diet up. Just again, maybe it's something simple too, like a potato and a vegetable and a meat or something at a restaurant. It doesn't have to be like the wildest thing on the menu, but broadening it up a little bit so that you can um, eat more at the restaurant. Because in your equation, I feel like the problem when I was going through it was like, how do you explain to someone FODMAPs without it being like a big thing?
I
Like
feel
gluten,
like
I
I
feel like could.
wouldn't though. I feel like if it was me at least,
Mm,
I'd probably just be like, "Hey, like I'm working on some health stuff right now and I'm on like this sort of funky diet and I happen to know that this restaurant would be really easy for me to navigate. Like, would you mind if
right.
we
No,
go
that
here?" I don't know if I would go into the detail of like I have diarrhea and bloating and
no. I
FODMAP
don't
stands for fermentable oligosaccharide and
I don't necessarily think that. I think my point was that it might be hard to find a restaurant that would be low FODMAP. I
oh
think you
yeah.
could. I definitely think you could. And I think it would be hard for someone if you went to someone's house and said,
Yes.
"I'm low FODMAP, like accommodate me," is a harder ask than gluten, if that makes sense.
It is. I will say though too, another kind of thing that I've noticed cuz keep in mind like some of my experience was because I was a vegetarian for a long time. So
Yeah.
I was on a weird diet but like in a different way growing up for a long time from the age of like 11 to 22. And for me at least, like I would go to parties, I would go to barbecues, I would go to, whatever. I don't know what else I'm looking for. But I would go to events and I never expected people to accommodate me. Not once. Every
Right.
single time I would bring a veggie burger with me and I would ask them, "Hey, could you throw this on the grill at some point?" But like that's kind of a difference too is that if you made a good point, if you're doing something like low FODMAP for the therapeutic amount of time, meaning you do the elimination phase for maybe 4 to 6 weeks, what Monash University recommends. And then you start trialing foods and customizing it and going through the next phase of that process. But if you're in that really strict, like 4 to 6 week phase and you just need to eliminate, you could just bring your own food to the party or the
Right.
whatever. And it does kind of stink. I'm not trying to minimize that, but I think that doing that is better than just not going to the thing at all.
Right. And I 100% agree. That's generally what I did as time went on, is just bring stuff to places. And again, doing that long term definitely was a bit of a struggle too, and might be a barrier for wanting to socialize. It's like, oh, if I have to go make this meal, and maybe if you are in a more restrictive phase, like doing FODMAP, maybe you try to do social engagements less around food, maybe game night or something, or walking with a friend in a park, or just kind of chilling in a park.
Or
Um,
hanging out more so with people that you're really, really comfortable with and people
right,
who get it.
right. Invite people
Within,
to your house or something, and
yeah,
everyone can bring their own food, and you can kind of just like have a meal that you had prepared at
yeah.
home, something
Or
like
again,
that.
like if you have multiple friends that, in your circle, if there's that one friend who kind of would roll their eyes at you and be like, "Oh, that's weird. Can't you just eat a little
Yeah.
bit of it?" But then there's other friends who are more supportive, like maybe gravitate away from that person
Yeah.
and gravitate towards the people who would be mindful and empathetic and accommodating and like nice.
Yeah, for
That's a
sure.
strategy too.
Yeah, no,
Um,
totally.
can I share something related to FODMAPs, by the way? This just, it was chef's kiss
Okay,
that I found
please.
this recently.
Please.
I found a research article recently, and it's only about a year old. The title, Gut Brain Axis Dysfunction Underlies FODMAP Induced Symptom Generation in Irritable Bowel Syndrome.
Woo!
If you people want to read it, PubMed ID is 351 66384. It's a thing of freaking beauty. But basically, what they said, and this is not the first study to document some of this. Basically, what they said is when they infused fructan or glucose or saline into, I forget if it was the stomach. Yes, it was the stomach of people with IBS and people who were healthy, normal controls. And then they did MRIs. And they did an MRI of the brain and they did an MRI of the abdomen, I believe, or they did something to quantify the gas production in the intestines. And they said that fructans increase small bowel motility and colonic gas volume, similarly in IBS patients and healthy controls. They
Mm,
said the difference between IBS versus not IBS is not actually the quantity of gas produced. And again, this is not the first paper that has shown this. The difference is how the body responds to that gas production. And the people with IBS, there's a lot more pain and cramping that goes along with that. And they say that a lot of that is the nervous system's perception of what's going on in the
mm,
gut. So they said it's a gut brain axis issue. And they even said here, pain related brain regions responded differently to fructans in IBS compared to healthy controls, including the cerebellum, supramarginal gyrus anterior, and mid cingulate cortex, insula, and thalamus. These brain responses covaried with symptom response in IBS. So basically, the problem, at least per this group and their
right.
research and what they were finding, the problem might not be the amount of gas produced and what's happening in the intestines when we eat something like FODMAPs. The problem might be the wiring of what happens between your gut and your brain and how your body is perceiving those sensations. And in IBS, that is happening in a way that it is perceived much more as pain, discomfort, and cramps and bloating.
Right.
Fascinating stuff.
Yeah, it's wild. And I think it's interesting from a FODMAP perspective because it's like, do you then focus on things like socialization and things that are going to help the vagus nerve and
Well,
generally
that's
might help with those signaling, help with the signaling, or do you spend all your time and energy on reducing
decreasing the
FODMAPs for the
gas.
rest of your life? Like,
Yeah.
so it's
Well,
interesting because the core, like the root of it, it or a big part of the root is the brain gut axis. So doing everything possible to kind of push the needle there, and I think doing the fundamental things that are important to push the needle is so important, and connection is so fundamental to the vagus nerve. And it brings me back to the one episode we had with Jennifer Franklin
mm,
where she talked about this, and I remember she was talking about it from an evolutionary standpoint, and I think that that's helpful because as a baby, if you're not connected to your mother, you're gonna die essentially, which is
yeah,
horrible to
your
think
host.
about. But, you need connection to survive. And so that's built into our wiring. And if you're isolating and disconnected from people socially, you're going to have a hard time from a gut symptom standpoint, especially if you were a social person. And everyone needs a certain degree of social engagement, even if you're like an introvert, you know. I do think some people need a certain degree of social connection. Some people might need more, some people might need less, and that's something to consider too. You might be saying, "Oh, this person socializes as much as I do and they're like content and happy," but maybe you need more than that. Maybe you need less. Maybe like It's like you have too much
Exactly.
socialization and you need time away to yourself to connect with a passion or hobby
Well, it's
and
kind
less
of like
social connection.
sleep, right?
Yeah,
It's like every human being needs sleep. We can't
right.
argue that. But some people genuinely get by fine with like 7.5 hours, and some people need more like 8.5. I think that the people who say, I do great on 6 hours of sleep or less, like they're delusional. So that's a whole separate conversation when we get into the sleep episodes
Right.
next. But, there's going to be some normal for you, and it might not perfectly match everybody else. So, to your point, there are going to be people who are more introverted and they could fill up their cup, so to speak, with social engagements pretty quickly and readily. And then there are some people who are really social creatures and they need much more of that. So some of this, it kind of reminds me of yoga, which ironically is great for the vagus nerve. Because in yoga, sometimes they'll say, stay on your mat, which means don't look at Susie doing a handstand. Don't look at Sally doing the perfect downward dog. Don't look at Claire doing the perfect whatever pose. You focus on you, you stay on your mat, you do your own yoga practice, and don't let your mind and your eyeballs wander. But I feel like it's kind of the same thing here. Like, you need to focus on what amount of social engagement and connection makes you feel good
Mm.
and what feels like a reasonable amount for a reasonable human being. In the beginning, it might feel uncomfortable just because you're out of the practice of it and you're like worried about having tummy issues. You're worried that you're going to have a noxious
Mm.
fart and clear the room. Like there's going to be some degree of social anxiety, I think, getting back into
Mm.
real life, but it's important. And actually, there was an interesting quote. Let me find it real quick. I have a bunch of quotes because I was kind of in a PubMed deep dive recently on this.
Well, and I will say too, it's interesting you bring up like the gas and the fear of needing to go to the bathroom. I do think those become almost like phobias in a weird way that you
Yeah.
almost have to just learn that. And there's varying degrees of this because some people might have like legit accidents, which I think is
Yeah.
definitely a scarier like ask for. But I think there's a lot of people too that are just freaked out to like maybe not know where a bathroom is and like have to go number two out
Hmm.
and have diarrhea out and have bad gas out. And I think that it gets built up so much in their head too, where it's like, oh my God, this is so scary. Um, and it really is scary. I think it's really scary if that's a big fear of yours. But at the same time, you could be being held back so much because of that fear, like any fear. Like, um, you know, if you're afraid of flying, but you really want to visit someone in California, like at
You
some
might need
point
to
you
get
might
your
need to
butt on a
get over,
plane.
right. So if it's inhibiting your goals in some way, just keep that in mind. And if that's been deterring you from socializing, you might want to maybe start out with having people at your house or something where you're more comfortable, maybe something that's a baby step. Um,
Well, it goes kind of back to the OCD episodes, right? You need to almost
yeah,
treat it like an exposure therapy sort of thing.
right,
So you're right, like initially bring people to you and your toilet.
right.
Then maybe don't tell them, come visit me in my toilet, but like initially
Or
you
you
bring
could.
people to
I mean,
you and your toilet.
right.
Then maybe the next step is to go to like your best friend's house where you're at least familiar with their bathroom or whatever. Then maybe the next step is to go to a public place that's near your own house or near your friend's house or is a familiar place. And then, eventually you could get to the point where you go to like the state fair and it's, porta johns and chaos and crowds and insanity. But you don't go from 0 to 60. You don't go from only being in your house and being cooped up and then automatically to the state fair. That would
Yeah.
be kind of wacko to do that.
I ever told you, did I tell you about my client that always referred to her tummy when they ate kind of crappy food as state fair tummy?
No, that's
She was
amazing though.
always
I
like,
could,
if they ate fried food or something, she's like, I knew I was gonna get state fair tummy. Like anything that's I just love that term. It cracks me
yeah,
up.
it
So when you
it
said state
paints a
fair,
picture.
it reminded me of that.
Considering the sort of food you see at the state fair, that just
Right.
paints a perfect picture. And yes, I
Yeah.
can vividly imagine.
Yeah.
but I thought you might get a kick out of this as the dietitian in the house.
Mm.
So this one paper that was looking at like vagal connection, and they're talking a lot in these papers about heart rate variability, which is reflective of vagal tone being reflective of one's like ability to socialize or like their social life in a way. And this group said most dispensed advice on how people might improve their physical health calls for increased physical activity, improved nutritional intake, and reductions in tobacco and alcohol use. This good advice can now be expanded to include self generated positive emotions. Recurrent momentary experiences of positive emotions appear to serve as nutrients for the human body, increasing feelings of social belonging and giving a needed boost to the parasympathetic health, which in turn opens people to move more and more, or it opens people up to more and more rewarding, positive, and emotional and social experiences. Over time, the self-sustained upward spiral of growth appears to improve physical health. How perfect is that, though, that they said it's like a nutrient for the body? Oh, beautiful.
Chef's kiss. Mm.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and the argument that sometimes I get from clients when talking about things like connection and like stress management in general is just, oh, I'm off doing all this other stuff. I don't have time for that. And it's sometimes important to think just about how you are utilizing your time, energy, and resources and assessing, you know, could you pull some time, energy, and resources away from the diet restrictions that's consuming up a lot of your time,
And
or
researching and Facebook
researching, managing
groups and Reddit
supplements,
threads.
that kind of stuff. I mean, just kind of looking realistically at how you're investing your time and energy is so key. And maybe, again, it's baby steps. Maybe start with trying to organize something with a friend like every other week or something. And it could be small. It could be literally uh, going to a park for an hour and going on a walk or something like that, or just sitting, chilling, having like a little picnic or something, or meeting a family member. It doesn't even have to necessarily be a friend, like
Or a
trying
phone
to,
call.
yeah, phone
if
call.
if you have been cooped up for real for a long time, the first step could just be sending a text message or putting in a
Mm,
phone call to a friend. Or we've talked about
time.
before, we love the Marco Polo app. We could send
Mm,
videos back and forth to each other. Like
yeah,
that might be the first step before you even get to the in-person stuff.
true. Very true. Um, that's always something too. When I talk about with clients, I usually will say try to do 15 minutes of something each day that will recharge you. And I'll tell them to do a self-care menu type thing. Um, and I'll sometimes put that as an example, like calling a friend can be a form of self-care, calling a family member could be a form of self-care. Like you can add that to the list if that's something you generally like enjoy doing is connecting with a loved one. And maybe again, there's certainly tons of other in-person things to do, but if it's just like a 10 to 15 minute window you have, you could certainly call a friend or a loved one or connect with a friend and loved one in some way. But
Well,
yeah,
and
go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, and total plug for Marco Polo, hashtag not sponsored, because the nice thing is you and your friends could be on totally different schedules and you could
Mhm.
send videos back and forth to each other whenever. Like,
Yeah.
I've probably numerous times I have sent you a Marco Polo at like midnight or something crazy, and then you just watch it the next day whenever you get it and you respond whenever. And I
I'm
have a,
thinking, why is she up at midnight?
well, yeah, that's a valid
And
point.
then you're thinking, why is she up at 7 a.m.? Or like in the
that's
past when I
that's more
had
reasonable.
Cece, 3
But
a.m. or something weird when I was in the midst of newborn
yeah,
wake
chaos.
ups.
And I have friends on, like, I'm on the East Coast, I have friends on the West Coast. We would never ever get to talk if not for Marco Polo, because we have completely different schedules. They're 3 hours behind me and we're both working and seeing patients. So like I have one really good friend who is in California. My best friend from high school, we went like a decade and a half without talking hardly at all because just we're busy and different schedules, living in different places. Collectively over 15 years, we probably talked 10 times. And that's being pretty generous. I got her to download Marco Polo, and now I hear from her multiple times a week. Because now the scheduling doesn't matter. We just like fill each other in on our stuff whenever we have a moment, and it's fantastic. So anyway, it could be something like that, even if you don't want to make a phone call.
Yeah, and I do think sometimes too, it can get a little weird. I know it did for me personally when you've gone through years of maybe a health journey where you have been sucked up in your own stuff to then re-engage with some friends that you might not have hung out with in a little bit. There can be some awkwardness there. And hopefully you can push through it, or maybe you live in a city different than you grew up and you've kind of struggled to make some friends as an adult, which is hard. I think making friends as an
It
adult
is.
in a new city can be challenging. And there are a couple tips I might mention for that. Um, One thing, and this is going to vary depending on the person, but there have been a couple ways I've been able to make some friends as an adult. One is going to a gym with really small class sizes. So, like, I trained at a gym that had like usually 5 to 6 people in it. And it was usually the same 5 to 6 people, maybe plus or minus a random person that came from other times. Um, but that was really nice, especially when I was transitioning to virtual work, to have 2 times a week that I was going to this gym and getting some social in-person connection. Because I really struggled to balance virtual for a while personally. I just think I wanted a little bit more connection between calls. So that really helped me. Um, there was a group that I went to and found. There's a therapy office here in Cincinnati who one of my, well, she's kind of now a friend, like a, I don't know if we're necessarily friends. We're like heavy acquaintances on our way to maybe friendship. But I've done multiple programs through that group, and they had a young empowered women circle. They called it like you circle. So just it was a group of women who met and had goals, and it could be goals, work goals or life goals, and you would share your goals with the other women. And then it was run by a psychologist. So they would kind of help you map out like what's the next baby step that you're going to do. And you'd all kind of support each other in whatever goal it was that you were trying to do. Now, that group at the tail end, COVID hit. So it was sort of weird. But I still talk to some of the people from that group. So I think that something like that, you might be able to find, a circle or a book club or something like that that has regular meetups. But I think that that kind of stuff can be helpful. We've met a lot of our neighbors. We're pretty close to our neighbors because we got Chip. So get a cute puppy as a, even like a dog park, I think can be a good place to meet people. I feel like they always talk about people dating at a dog park, but I'm sure you can meet other people that like dogs that,
And you could play at puppy play dates.
right, you can play and make puppy play dates, but Chip was literally a godsend when we moved in here. I don't think we'd talk to any of our neighbors if it wasn't for Chip, because all the neighbors were then obsessed with Chip.
As they should be.
And so he was such a conversation starter. Um, but so bringing your dog kind of anywhere, I think, especially a puppy, can be really helpful for
Yeah.
connection.
Babies, too. If you have kids,
Yeah.
there are play groups and all sorts of different things. I remember Mike would take Jess to, there was some sort of like a play group at one of the community buildings, and basically it was a gymnasium, and they just dumped a bunch of toys in the middle and put mats in the middle, and they let like the toddlers and the babies have at it. And then the
Yeah.
parents were kind of on the outskirts of the room chit-chatting and watching their kid. And we met some of our fellow like parent friends that way, going to
Yeah.
events like that, or playgrounds. You could drum up conversations with people at playgrounds. if you're a parent and you bring your kid. If you're a stranger and you don't have a kid, you go to a playground, you're a creep. Stop.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? Like if you go and your kid is playing with the other kid, you could go strike up a conversation with the parent and be like, "Hey, our kids get along really well. Maybe we should do a play date."
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Another thing that, now that you're talking about some of this stuff, um, I'm not overly religious, but I do think like some of my some clients that I work with, I grew up Catholic, um, but some clients that I work with really have great churches or places of worship that they can connect with a lot of people and they can have great communities in that regard, which I think those can be helpful if that's something that you connect really well with. My sister and I were talking about, we went to a Catholic school here and we were just debating, like, do we send our kids to the Catholic school? And she was saying that the community seems pretty strong in some of these Catholic schools, like more connection between the parents and faculty and things like that. So we were just talking a little bit about that. Oh, like that might be nice to have a little bit of a smaller community when you're putting your kids in school. And it just made me think a little bit about parishes. And there's definitely ways to connect with people um, in that regard too. So just thought I'd throw that in there.
Yeah. Yeah. And even like I think meetup.com still exists. I'm pretty sure that's still a thing. When Mike and I lived in Phoenix, I was moving from California. I didn't know anybody. We knew a couple people from his research group, but we would go to meetups. So at the time, I was gluten and dairy free. So we would go to like paleo meetups, we would go to vegan meetups. And it was
Mhm.
always kind of comical because like people at the vegan meetups would ask, like, how long have you been a vegan? And I was like, oh, I'm not a vegan, but
Right.
I don't eat dairy. Therefore, most of the stuff you guys bring to potlucks and like most of this stuff works really well with my diet. But like when I'm at home, I do eat meat. Or similarly, like at the paleo meetup, I met one of my best friends from when I lived in Phoenix at the paleo meetup group.
Mm.
And similarly, the people at the paleo group would be like, oh, how long have you been paleo? And I'm like, oh, I'm not. Like I do eat some
Oh
rice and
my
I eat some
gosh.
grains. It's just I'm gluten free and dairy free. So this works really well. But yeah, like meetups. Even honestly, one time I met somebody because I went on like a local Facebook group. It was like I forget if it was one of the natural birth and parenting groups or if it was just like the Chapel Hill Moms group or something like that.
Hmm.
And every now and then you see people do this, and I did this. I just posted and was like, "Hi, I want to make friends."
Right.
And I put like, here's a little bit about me, here's my hobbies, here's like kind of well my personality in a nutshell. Comment below if you want to maybe be friends. And then I ended up meeting a person or two that way too.
I have another good one too that I just thought of
Okay.
that I'm super pumped. So there's dating apps that then um have developed friend, I don't know, categories. I don't know if it's a separate app, but I know my in-laws have used Bumble BFF. They moved to New York. So it's like all about finding friends. So there's a Bumble for dating, and then there's like a Bumble BFF for friends.
Oh, okay.
So I know it's kind of funny. So my brother-in-law started hanging out with this guy he met on Bumble BFF, and then he was married. And so my sister-in-law became best friends with his wife, but then they got divorced. So essentially, like, she met her best friend through Bumble BFF, but it wasn't a direct relationship meetup, but it's kind of funny. But
That's
yeah,
so
so
funny.
Bumble BFF is a thing.
Yeah.
I just thought of that.
Well,
Um,
and again, to go back to one you already mentioned, if you are an entrepreneur or if you would like to be an entrepreneur, you're like thinking about starting a business, there's almost always like business groups. Oftentimes they could be called lead groups
mm,
or,
right.
something like that, like either through the Chamber of Commerce or like where I remember when I lived in Phoenix and when I lived in Chapel Hill, I think I just went on either Facebook or meetup.com or Google and searched like leads group in Chapel
Mhm.
Hill, or what's the one that's really famous? Is it BNI? Like BNI
Yeah.
groups. That one's paid, so that one might be a little bit more of a barrier to entry if you're like casually thinking about being an entrepreneur. But I've met friends that way. There's a friend in Chapel Hill that I still keep in touch with, and we met at the Chapel Hill Leads group. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, totally. The only other one that I will um, mention that I think I really enjoyed was going to in-person guitar lessons. I really vibed with my guitar teacher, and it was just like a fun 30, 45-minute thing that I did on the weekends for a while. And I still play the guitar, I just don't go to lessons. But yeah, that was really fun. So sometimes it's like a double whammy where you're kind of learning a new skill that's exciting and socializing at the same time.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think these are all really great ideas. Um, One thing
And
I will say too, like sometimes it's also about working on the quality of the relationships you have. So, like from a connection standpoint, assessing like, ooh, like this person seems to add a lot to my life, and I want to work on like building a stronger connection. Whereas like sometimes some other people might be kind of pulling you down or more of a weight.
energy vampires.
Right, energy vampires. Do you watch What We Do in the Shadows then?
I have not, no, but I've heard the term energy
Okay.
vampires. I think that there might be a
It's probably
book
a
even
regular
that
thing, but
references that.
there's a show and one of the guys is an energy vampire and he just kind of bores people to death. So
Yeah.
he'll just be like kind of like mumbling on about some really boring thing and they're kind of like falling asleep. They're all falling
Yeah.
asleep. It's really funny.
Well, yeah, I could see energy vampire being a couple different variations too. Like there's also going to be people who are just like, I don't know how to describe this without getting into specifics about an individual, but like, just like everything at like every interaction with them is like negative or ranting or bitching,
Right.
or like everything's always super woe is me, like let's focus on me and my problems, and like complaining, or just constantly being a drain. I think
Yeah.
you could be an energy vampire and be boring, but you could be an energy vampire and be very not boring but
Right.
still be very taxing on that friend.
It's usually more so the case. I don't think people are as much
Yeah.
bothered by a boring energy vampire. I think it's
Yeah.
more of like the ones that are dragging you down in a major way.
Yeah.
Um,
And I mentioned this is a pretty big thing early on that I mentioned in FODMAP Freedom, but I even go as far as to mention, I think, is it Jim Rohn? Like there's some person who's quoted as basically saying, you are the amalgamation of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
mm,
So I post this in FODMAP Freedom that this is like an exercise you could do.
mm,
Go through and write down the 5 people you spend the most time with, and then just kind of go through and think about your relationship, think about them, think about, are you a good influence on them? Are they a good influence on you? Is this a healthy relationship? And if it's not a healthy relationship, or if it's draining you, you've got to ask, is this a relationship that I'm willing and able to modify?
yeah.
Right? So, yeah,
No,
I would say look
that's
at,
a great exercise. I'd almost add one other element to that. Um, and this is just something that I think I've experienced with Armand since having a baby. It's like sometimes we're so busy managing like the baby and the transition that I felt like we were a little disconnected the past year, which I think is very normal. But I know we've talked about it where it's like, oh yeah, like I just feel like there's not we're not getting as much one-on-one time and like quality one-on-one time unless we're putting forth more effort now because we've kind of exposed like, oh, it's been a year, like hi, there you are, it's been more
how have you
head
been?
down, right, head down with a grindstone like survival mode, and now we're kind of coming up and we're like, oh, maybe we need to like work on strengthening our relationship a little bit more now that we're like on the other side of CC. So sometimes it's not even necessarily that the relationships like, draining or positive, but maybe there still needs to be a little bit of work on re-engaging a reconnection. That's what Armand and I are working. We're doing an exercise. This might be a good fun thing to think about doing. So every night before bed, we are doing an exercise where um, we tell each other one thing we're grateful for. We tell each other one win that we had that day, and then one thing we learned. Sometimes that one's a little bit more like we didn't learn anything. But sometimes there is something, whether it's just something about Cece that she did or um, some new thing I learned researching
I like that.
something or so we do that practice pretty much every night now for the last maybe month or so.
I
Um,
like that. I'm going to have to borrow that. You hear this, Mix Master Mike? My husband edits our
yeah,
podcast.
it's
You
like a
heard this, Mike?
fun
We're going to
it's a
borrow
f-
this. This is cool.
yeah, it's a fun exercise. I think it's like fun sometimes to hear like what Armand's wins are. I'm like, oh, I didn't know that even happened today, if it was something at
Yeah.
work that we just hadn't talked about.
Yep.
Um, so
A,
yeah, it's been a fun exercise. I've enjoyed it.
a
Um,
less profound variation. So, okay. So, funny enough, Mike had a recent realization kind of similarly like, oh, we could probably like wind down in the evening together a little bit more.
right,
But our variation is a little bit more comical and a little bit more like we're living in the 21st century.
okay,
Mike just said recently, like in the last couple days, he was like, instead of us separately scrolling on our phones for 10 minutes before we turn the lights out and go to bed, we should watch things on our phones together,
right,
which is comical that the phone is still involved. But
right,
we did do that for like a night or two, and then we kind of slacked off. I've been really beat lately, though, so I've just been kind of like collapsing.
right.
But I thought that was a nice idea too.
Yeah,
Like instead of, he's watching fail videos and I'm watching K-pop videos or whatever it might be, like let's find something that we would both enjoy and watch it together and have that experience together and like snuggle for the 10 minutes instead of separately staring at our
right.
phones.
That's really funny because Armand and I used to do that with like TikTok, but his TikTok, we would always argue about whose TikTok would watch because my algorithm was way different than his algorithm. He'd be
Same.
dying laughing, and I'd be like, "Oh, this is terrible! Like, no, I don't love this."
Yep. Same here.
Um, and
For
so
us, it's the YouTube algorithm. Like Mike,
yeah,
he gets one flavor of YouTube. And again, my YouTube algorithm is basically K-pop and cats and
I,
gut health.
I feel like
Like
I
that.
worry about Armand with what his algorithm's spitting out. I'm like, how is this computing? But yeah, I liked that in theory, but it never panned out super great when we would try to watch the same phone. But yeah, it's funny. We sometimes watch shows together. We have a few shows we watch together. Um, but yeah, it's been nice. It's been a nice. That's been a nice exercise. So yeah, I think the end all point being like maybe it's not that you need to make more friends or more connections, whether it's family or whatever, but maybe you need to deepen the connections you have, and so that
And
they're more enriching and
yeah.
deeper.
Yeah. Well, and selecting how you spend your time with the people that you do have in your circle. So I might have shared this once before, but I thought it was really great. Years ago, I heard somebody giving a lecture, and he said he likened life to treading water in a swimming pool. I'm sure I've said this before, but life is treading water in a swimming pool. As long as your head is above the water and you're breathing, you are alive. When you sink to the bottom, that is representative of death. So we're treading water, we're treading water. Like there's a little bit of effort, but for the most part, you could do it indefinitely and be fine.
Right.
But the caveat is every single one of us is wearing a backpack, and there is some non zero number of stones or bricks in the backpack that's weighing you down. Some of us have more bricks, some of us have just the one brick, but we all have some weight that's making the treading of the water at least a little bit challenging. Then he said, and this is the part I really liked, he said, along the edge of the swimming pool are there are people who are actively trying to help you remove bricks, and there are people who are actively trying to give you more bricks. Your job in life, assuming you want to live like a happy, healthy, fulfilling life, your job is to correctly identify who's who and make a point to swim toward the brick taker awayers and swim the hell away from the people who are trying to add stones and bricks to your bag. So again, if you have 10 close relationships or friends and two of them are just nasty toxic people who are incapable of doing anything but complaining, swim away from that, man. Like,
Right. Right.
emphasize the people who really like make you feel connected and warm and fuzzy and bring you joy and make you laugh and really like light up your nervous system in a positive way. Don't waste your time with people who are weighing you down, literally and figuratively.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I love that analogy. Um yeah, it's like we need to definitely invest in the right people when it comes to friendship and even family. Again, like sometimes you can put up with someone for so long if they're my family's, has its quirks and can be annoying at times, but generally is great and amazing and very lovely. But again, like any family, you could get annoyed of someone here or there, like you do. But my husband's family, uh, there's definitely way more family drama on that side, and sometimes it's just like better off him not talk to his mom because again, like it's he's tried a whole bunch and it's just really stressful. Um, so again, like even sometimes family stuff is probably even more uncomfortable in some ways, but sometimes you have to kind of set boundaries with certain people because they're so um, hard to engage with and so problematic. Like Armand just hasn't really been able to find a way to have a relationship with her that makes him, I don't know how to describe it. It's so hard to have a relationship with her, um, and so hard on him. Like it's just not worth it. Like he's
Well, again,
tried.
it's
There's only
adding
so many
bricks to
times.
his backpack when he
There's only
tries.
so many times that you can try it. Where
Yeah.
it's like, well,
Yeah,
um,
for him, she's a brick giver, not a brick
yeah,
taker.
right,
And that
right,
stings, but
yeah, it really does. I
yeah.
mean, it's not the end that you would hope for, and I don't think he really has any ill will towards his mom, but it's just like it's kind of is what it is, and
Yeah.
it's kind of the best thing for Armand and almost our family because we get kind of pulled into the drama and I'm solo drama. I'm just like, oh my God, I don't know how to handle this. Like I'm used
Yeah.
to my family tends to be more like, let's shove stuff under the rug and forget about it. Whereas like his family's
Which is
like,
probably not healthy either, but
right, right.
we all
Again, like,
have brain lesions. They're all just different.
right.
That's all.
Granted, some of the stuff isn't necessarily big things in my family, but it's like, better just to like leave that as it is and not talk about it. Whereas I
Yeah.
feel like our Armand's family is more like, let's like rip off the rug and like expose like everything and shove it in your face. And
Yeah.
it's just right
Expose the
there.
wound.
Right. And
Uh,
like salt it, salt the wound.
yeah. No, I
It's
get what you're
wild.
trying to say. Well, I guess another way to frame it perhaps is maybe your family is better at picking their battles and
Yeah,
choosing like what
100%.
is a big enough deal that we bring this up and we make a big deal out of it and what can we just like let slide because it's not a big deal versus again like people who can be energy vampires or brick givers.
Mm,
I think one trait of that can be that they make a big deal out of everything and you're just
mhm.
like enough like you
Right.
need to snap out of it. Yeah, I mean, I think that we kind of went the opposite direction I was anticipating with this episode in a way, because I was imagining that we would lead off with more like science and researchy type stuff, but we actually dove right into the practical of like your existing relationships and how to maybe find new relationships and friends. And if I may, though, I did have a little bit more research nerddom to share to bestow upon
Yeah, for sure.
you. Because again, I've been up to my eyebrow hairs in a deep dive on PubMed on this topic. So just to throw this out there and we can chew on it a little bit for the end of the episode here. This study was really neat. It was actually from UNC Chapel Hill. And I'm totally like trying to abuse my connections and see if I can get an email introduction for the PI on this research team because I think it would be so cool to speak with her or have her on the podcast one of these days.
Yeah.
But it's called Upward Spirals of the Heart: Autonomic Flexibility as Indexed by Vagal Tone Reciprocally and Prospectively Predicts Positive Emotions and Social Connectedness. PubMed ID for you nerds out there is 2081735. No, wait, 20851735. Sorry. But just a couple little snippets that I thought were really cool. They said both social connectedness and positive emotions are associated with higher vagal tone. In addition, vagal tone as is a marker of autonomic flexibility and adaptability, characteristics that lead to increases in social connectedness and positive emotions. We posit that the association between vagal tone and well-being reflects an upward spiral in which autonomic flexibility, represented by vagal tone, facilitates capitalizing on social and emotional opportunities, and the resulting opportunities gain in turn, or I'm sorry, the resulting opportunistic gains in turn lead to higher vagal tone. So basically what they're saying is if you have more social connectedness and more positive emotions that you experience, that increases your vagal tone. And then the higher vagal tone will make you like more flexible and adaptable and like socially aware and socially social. And then, so it's like you get the positive emotions and social connectedness leads to better vagal tone. Better vagal tone makes you a more sociable human being. And then you naturally socialize more. And then that increases vagal tone more. And it's like
A
this
loop.
cool, yeah, it's a self reinforcing loop, or they called it an upward spiral, where
Mm,
I think it just goes to show you that if you can work on this stuff even a little bit, it feels so irrelevant and so silly for us to say, like, make one phone call to a friend this week, right? Like that just, everybody remember has a little bit of the case of I'm special. And
right.
everybody's probably sitting at home being like, lady, if making one phone call to one friend that I miss was going to cure my IBS, I would have done it 2 years ago. Come on.
Right. Like there's bigger fish to fry.
Yeah, like I have methane, damn it.
Right.
But really, really what ends up happening is as you experience more positive emotions and you bring joy and fulfillment into your life and as you connect and are compassionate with yourself and the world around you, you get the benefit of better vagal tone, and then the vagus nerve controls your dang gut. So
Yeah.
that's like pretty well established that if you have low vagal tone, you have a higher increased risk of things like dysmotility and SIBO and indigestion and like functional GI disorders. This isn't something we're
Right.
just pulling out of nowhere. It's pretty well established in the research at this point. But you know, functional neurology and functional medicine, bless their little hearts, they're so silly because they'll tell you that you need to work on vagal tone and they'll send you home to gargle. And it's laughable because that's not how this works. It's like that GIF or that meme from the
Mm.
commercial, right? That's not how any of this works. The vagus nerve is about connection and our connection with the world and the human beings around us. And even from like a more sort of nerdy academic perspective, if you don't believe this, if you don't believe us at this point, this other paper made a good point. They said the vagus nerve, for instance, is anatomically linked to nerves involved in coordinating eye gaze, generating facial expressions, and tuning the ear to the frequency of human voice, functions that are critical for social affirmative behavior or afflative behavior. So yes, the vagus nerve does stuff in the gut, and that's what we all focus on. And yes, the vagus nerve does stuff with like heart rate and breathing, but also a lot of the nonverbal cues that can make you a good or bad socializer have
Yeah.
vagal origins or very close to vagal origins. So,
Right.
yeah,
Well,
it just
and
makes
it's the
sense.
funny thing, like even some of the stuff that I do like meditation or breath work, it's funny from a priority list standpoint, it kind of makes me laugh. I remember I went to a party and a certain family member would leave the party to go meditate. It's like
I
this
poked fun at
def
my best friend for doing that in another episode too.
I know
Yeah,
it's
like how
like
does that make
this
sense?
I know this defeats the purpose. Like meditation should help you be more present in your life, not pull you away from the party.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that there are situations like that for sure, where you have to kind of shake your head a little bit and see like, oh, is this really the priority list?
Well, and again, it goes back to like the practical application of complex information,
Right,
right? So,
right,
again, like the functional neurology people who tell you to gargle vigorously until your eyes tear up, that is neurologically, anatomically sound advice. The
right.
pathways involved in doing that are absolutely vagal in nature, and all of that from a neurological perspective makes sense. But the practical application is dumb. Like that's
Like, are
not
you going to gargle
enjoyable.
forever, or are
Yeah.
you just going to go hang out with people and enrich your life? You know?
Well, A, which one sounds more enjoyable and
Right.
practical to do for the rest of your life? But also, it starts to beg the question things like, okay, so how are all these people pooping great and they don't have tummy issues and they're presumably not gargling for 10 minutes every day of their life,
Right.
right? Like your IBS is not from a gargling deficiency
Mm,
necessarily, but your IBS might actually be very closely related to a social connectedness deficiency. And
right.
I think that we've seen this too since 2020.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. We
there's
should have talked about that too. Oh my gosh, COVID seemed
huge.
to be a
Well,
huge trigger for so many people.
and I even have a citation for that. I ended up not weaving this into FODMAP freedom because I already had too much research in this particular section of the course anyway. But there's an actual article, the psychological impact of SARS-CoV-2 quarantine: observations through the lens of polyvagal theory. Like
Right.
they're talking about exactly what we have discussed, and they basically say that when your social engagement is lowered, like in quarantine, you have more activation of the sympathetic nervous system and like protective fight or flight parts of the brain. And that dampens vagal tone and dampens your ability to regulate things like your gut and your immune system and your sleep. And they say, as an example, according to polyvagal theory, quarantine and social distancing following COVID-19 pandemic may dampen nucleus ambiguous activity in the brainstem and hinder homeostatic cardiorespiratory functioning, emotional self-regulation, and health. In addition, enduring quarantine may foster heightened implicit vigilance for social threat, emotional dysregulation, poor sleep, and immune response, potentially increasing the chance of infections or dysbiosis, right? Like all of that stuff would be involved in dysbiosis and SIBO too, don't you think?
Ooh, yeah. And again, just anecdotally, I know we've talked about how sometimes there's a clear link of COVID starting and symptoms,
Yeah,
like either
understandably.
getting horribly aggravated or even developing, like out of
Yes.
nowhere.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I've even noticed with this group of students going through FODMAP Freedom right now, we did a big like group meet and greet the other day, and we were on there. You know, everybody got a little bit of time to share their story, talk about their goals or their symptoms, and there was a distinct theme. A lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people either had a start of their IBS SIBO symptoms or an exacerbation of existing symptoms going through 2020.
mhm.
And you know, it is what it is. It's a weird time to be alive, but I kind of joked
Woo.
a couple of times on that call. I was like, "Oh, so your vagus nerve was fine at that time, right?" And everybody was like, "Yeah, totally." Like they know what they need to work on, even at the stage of the game.
Mm,
Yeah, it's just it was everything was going, you know, where in a handbasket. And I
mm,
think a lot of us, myself kind of included, probably haven't recovered from that.
mm.
It was kind of a lot.
Yeah, it was. It was. I Yeah, I don't know if there's anything more to say, but yeah, it was a wild time. It was a wild ride. Um, I'm trying to think of anything else that we missed. I have a couple other things, but they're not like major that just kind of came to mind.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that those were some of the highlights, at least from, again, like some of the research I wanted to share. Again, it's just, it really goes back to connection.
Yeah.
And if you think about it from like an evolutionary perspective, it makes sense. Again, like you said at the beginning of the episode, as a baby, you come into the world completely relying on your mom, especially, but the adults around you. And if you don't have connection with the people around you, you die. So you start out life being dependent on other people. And
And like
then,
the wiring of the nervous system is wired for this is important because you'll
yeah,
die if you don't have it. So
yeah,
even just that aspect of it is wild.
yeah. Well, and even, thinking about how our species probably lived for a long time in groups. Again, I think we've talked about this, maybe like the Julia King episode, for example, back in season one. if if you were in the tribe or the group, you had shelter, you had resources, you had some people who would go hunt, you had some people that would forage, you had some people that would tend to the crop. If we were at that stage of human development, you had some people like keeping a lookout. You could split up the tasks and split up the resources so that everybody was healthy and protected. But if you got ostracized from the group, if you got kicked out of the tribe because you were an asshole or something, you were hosed. The minute you fall asleep at night, the saber-toothed tiger is going to come and eat you. So you're we were really wired, especially up until maybe 100 or 200 years ago. We were really, really, really wired to rely on other people for protection and safety and food and shelter. And the world we live in is so different and so weird. And now we have this added benefit of like people think that they're connected because they interact with people through a screen, which I think largely is not true. Like a Facebook group or a Facebook news feed or an Instagram or like watching Instagram stories or listening to somebody's podcast is not the same as like a two-way conversation with a human
Right.
being that you know. But I think that social media and technology and just the age we live in can also give the illusion that you're more connected than you actually are. And and then that might also lead to people not wanting to prioritize this because they don't think it's a problem.
Right. Right. There's a level of like disconnection that comes with social media too. Um, or not really necessarily just social media, but screens in general. Whereas I feel like, especially younger kids, if they're on screens all the time, it's like they don't know how to connect socially in some ways. But um, I want to maybe end with this. What ways are you going to socialize in the next? Are you working on any ways to socialize more, you
Are you
personally?
asking me or are you posing this to the audience?
Well, I'm posing it to the audience and you, and then I have something that
Okay.
I'm working on. So I wanted to, if you had any social things you're working on or things that you're looking forward to in the near future, was kind of my question
Uh,
for you.
okay. Okay. Well, I would invite people to leave a comment on this video if you're watching on YouTube and let us know, what are you going to do to try to socialize more this week? But
Mhm.
also, do you have any other ideas? We rattled off a whole bunch,
Yeah.
but maybe there's some other idea that we didn't think of. So share that in the comments if you would be so kind. I think for me, I was just sharing earlier that I'm kind of in crunch time working on a project right now. And I think that I've got like a month probably of crazy crunch time. And then I was looking up spas on Google Maps and I'm going to book myself a spa day. I usually like, I'll go for a massage here or there,
So
but I
what
think
you're
I'm going to,
saying is you're going to be antisocial for the next month or so.
well, possibly. Well, the thing is too,
Nothing crazy socially, it sounds like.
well, we're really lucky now to live on a street with really nice, really social neighbors. So I have the ability that if I wanted to just step outside my house and if I walk to the mailbox, there's pretty much going to be a neighbor out there like walking up to me and saying hi,
Right.
which is wonderful and also dangerous because then
Yeah.
you could get sidetracked with a conversation very easily. But I'm trying to engage a little bit more with just our neighbors and hanging out a little bit more. For the month of July, I was working on this project still and was in major crunch time. And I didn't see anybody. I kept joking in text messages like, I swear I'm still alive. Mike didn't off me. I'm still in here. I'm just working a lot. So I think for me, just wandering outside and talking to
Yeah.
people is part of it. We're going to the beach this weekend for Jess's birthday. My kiddo's turning 8. Oh my God.
Oh,
Oh my God. I can't believe that. But we go to the beach with my parents for the long weekend and do that. So we're going to go to the aquarium and whatnot. So we'll get to see my parents and have a fun trip with them. I think those are my big ones, but I'll share something though. So I just made this. Our neighborhood, we're also really fortunate because our neighborhood is adorable and they have a social committee,
wow.
which I'm pretty sure is just one person, or at least it feels like it's the one person who's
Right.
our neighbor across the street. And she organized like a painted sip kind of thing, but
Nice.
there wasn't any booze. But she led us through doing a painting. So there was a group of us all doing this painting. So I went there with a couple of the neighbors. This is the finished product.
Wow.
Thank you. I need to put it on the wall behind me. I just haven't mounted it quite yet, but I'm very proud of it,
Yeah.
how it turned out. I took some inspiration from echinacea, a good antiviral aid going into cold and
Yeah.
flu season here. But yeah, so I did that little like painting class, and every now and then they
Nice.
do little get togethers and stuff. So I try to go
So
to those when
fun.
I can.
Yeah, I love my neighbors too. There's no necessarily social committee, but a lot of them are, we live in sort of an older neighborhood, so a lot of them are retired, so they're always out and about. So I talk to them a lot. I love that. That's so nice to have a neighborhood like that. Um, One thing I'm trying to start doing is meeting people for coffee slash
Hmm.
tea. Um, that's something I'm going to be working on and trying to schedule. I'm always just terrible at scheduling like things in like that. Armand is like my secretary, I swear to God. He like schedules all our social calendar things. So
The man
I
does
was
like a
telling,
checklist though, doesn't he?
yeah, it's a little bit much sometimes. And sometimes things are too scheduled out. So I'm like, what do we have going on this day? Like I want to do something with this person. Like something will come up organically and I can't do it because I'm double booked. But I didn't even realize it. But I really want to maybe like twice a month um, meet friends or like somewhat of colleagues. Like there's people that are other RDs in the area that I like to hang out with. People that I used to work with at my old job that get coffee randomly. So I'm gonna try to organize that and like schedule that out a couple months and do that, every other week or so. So
I
that's
like that
something on
idea.
my
I should I should make a point to do that too.
yeah,
I'm gonna
I think for me it's just like I always forget. Like I'm a last minute planner and I feel like at this point, with a lot of my friends having kids and husbands, and there's just so much going on that you really can't do last minute planning, especially for the weekends. So I was thinking, if I could just meet them during the week, for lunch or coffee, tea, something like that, like breakfast, I'd enjoy doing that, and that would be logistically would work well with my schedule. So
yeah. Another
yeah.
one I thought of to maybe interrupt you there is I totally forgot until we talked about it just now that I had found somebody kind of local, like half an hour away, who does foraging classes.
Ooh.
And I know, and I registered. It's like once a month. I registered for the one in July, and then I think that's when Jess got pink eye.
Oh.
And I basically had to email and ask for a refund. And I was like, I'm really sorry, but I don't think you want us coming because I was going to bring Jess
Right.
with me.
Right.
But I need to look because I think that the class goes through until October. Like the last class is October. So I need to make a point to go go do that foraging class because that sounded like a heck of a
Yeah.
lot of fun.
I know. I always think it's funny in our Marco Polos where I don't know. I don't know what you even say, but you're like, "Oh, I think I found this." And then you like disappear from the Marco Polo for a minute and then you come back.
Yeah. Or dogs.
Um
It's
or
oftentimes dogs
dogs.
too. Like
Yeah, dogs.
you'll get choppy little micro polos from me
Right.
because I'll talk to you for 30 seconds and be like, there's a dog, goodbye. And then I'll come back and be like, good news, I pet the dog. Its name is
Right.
this. It's this old. The owner was nice
Or
too.
the one time you were like, "Oh, I wasn't able to pet the dog." It's
Yeah.
always the worst.
That is
Always
the
the
worst.
worst.
You get all excited, you get all
All juice,
jazzed.
the blood's flowing.
Yep, I was ready.
Mm.
That's okay though. More often than not, the owner is okay with me petting the dog. So I'll take it.
Hmm.
But yeah. Well, look, guys, I feel like this is another episode of it turned into a little bit of a work in progress episode in a way because we ended up talking about like what we're trying to do to socialize more. Further proof that we do not have it all figured out. We are not perfect. We are not some weird gut goddess duo up on a pedestal ruling the world. We are just human beings trying to figure out how to be human beings with the rest of you.
Yeah.
So if you
True.
need further proof. But I look forward to hearing about all of your social engagements. We are rapidly approaching the holiday season for that matter. So comment below, let us know what kind of plans do you have for Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm even talking about those holidays right now. But yeah, share other ideas in the comments if you're here on YouTube. Otherwise, we will see you wherever you might be listening from in the next rip roaring episode of the IBS Freedom Podcast. Until then, toodaloo.